Hey guys, welcome to this week's lesson. Last week, we introduced you to the basic structure of HTML, and we gave you a pretty broad background into the different protocol stacks that exist in order to deliver HTML to you over the World Wide Web. So we're at the point now where we have this idea of an HTML document that has the capability to be rendered within our browsers. And the document itself is pretty simple from a high-level overview here. We have a basic high-level structure, and you want to think about an HTML document as really a tree, right? This kind of tree that grows out, similar to this kind of diagram right here, where we have this root element and it grows out. We have our head, we have our body, and within the head we can have other children, and within the body you can also have children. And each what we call element can have children of its in it of itself. So for example, if we look at this basic document that we developed last week, we define a basic doc type, which is basically telling the browser that we are using HTML5. We open up our HTML with an opening element called the HTML element, which is our root node here, our root element. And each element always has a closing and an opening and closing element. So here, in this case, we open it up, and then when we close it, it's the same exact syntax, but with a / right before the element name. And all of the children of this element, in this case the HTML, is embedded in the middle of the opening and closing tags. We call these tags, right? So HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and we're essentially marking up content to be presented on the web. So within the root element here of the HTML, we have two sections. We have the head section and the body section. Now within the head section, we have a title, and that's pretty much all we have right now. And then within the body section, we have an H1, which stands for heading 1, and then we have a paragraph. Super simple, right? The result of this in the browser looks like this. And this is where we basically left off last week. So at this point, you should have this in your environments and running successfully. So you should see pretty much exactly what you see here. Now, what I'd like to do this week is kind of extend our ideas of what's possible in HTML. We're literally just using straight HTML right now. We are not getting fancy with any styling using CSS. We're not using JavaScript to be able to manipulate anything in the HTML itself. We're just marking up a document using HTML. So far we learned a couple of different elements, right? We have the HTML element, the head, the title, the body, H1, and the P. We're really going to focus on content right now within the body, because this is really where people, as in users of browsers, right, see the content. And in many cases, this is where even search engines and non kind of human users see the content, right? So they can read the content for search engine optimization. So when somebody searches for something, they can find their relevant information. What I want to show you today is a couple of new elements, really, really powerful elements that make the web really what the web is today, right? Or really what it kind of always has been. So the element that I really want to dive into today is the anchor. Now the anchor has a funny name, right? It's called the anchor, which makes me think about like a boat throwing an anchor over the side of the boat or something like that. But an anchor tag literally gives us the capabilities to link to other pages. Now, not only other pages on our website, but other pages on the World Wide Web itself. And this is what gives the web the term web. It gives us the capability to start to actually link to things all over the place. So quick story, the reason why it's called an anchor is because you can actually link to content within the same page itself, which we normally call anchoring to that text. So you could do that. In this case, our text is not that long, so it doesn't make sense for us to kind of bounce around the content, but you could. I'm not going to really show that off right now, but what we do want to concentrate on is how can we use an anchor tag to actually link to things. So let's go ahead, and knowing that HTML, the structure of HTML follows this kind of graphical, this image here, right? Where we have a tag, an opening tag, and we have a closing tag. Now, we didn't talk about this part yet, these attributes. So we have this thing called an attribute. Now, an attribute basically allows you to describe information about a certain element. Now, the attribute can be something that we completely make up, or it can be something that actually provides functionality to that element itself. Now, when we talk about the anchor tag, attributes are especially important because it gives us the capability, or exposes the capability to us to be able to actually link to things. So what do I mean by that? Let's go ahead and jump back into this. Now, if I just say, I'm going to open up an anchor tag, which is just simply an A element, right? It looks like this. And I say, this is a link. Now, if we look at how the text comes over in the site, nothing is different. It looks exactly like a P tag, right? But the anchor tag has the ability for us to give it some attributes, and those attributes will give it functionality. And the one that really matters is called the href, or the hypertext reference. So if we say href equals, and then we put it in double quotes, some value. So we could say for example, we wanted to link to an external website. We could say http:// say google.com. Now, look what just happened to our website, the website here, the rendered website. This is a link is now styled differently. And if we roll over, there's actually a little cursor that indicates that we can click this. And if we go ahead and click it, boom, look at that. It took us right to Google. I'm going to go ahead and hit back, and it'll take us back to our site. So by just adding this hypertext reference, or an href, to the anchor tag, through the use of what we call an attribute, we are able to now link anywhere on the internet. Now, you may be saying, hey, this is really, really simple. Why am I spending so much time on this? This is extremely important when we talk about the World Wide Web. It literally creates the links that link everything together, right? Before search engines existed, right? Or before search engines were really fully developed as they are today, we had to rely on links within specific sites to take us places that were available. If it wasn't linked, it's as good as it not existing, because there was no way to actually get to it unless you knew the exact address. So you used to have things like web rings, we used to call them, and things like that, where people would list their links and it be included in what's called a ring, and folks would embed small little links on the bottom of their pages that went to other pages in that same ring, so you can actually browse around and keep everything linked together. But what happened, search engines started to realize, or really software engineers started to realize, that they can use this hypertext reference as a tool to be able to crawl the web, right? Crawl all of the links that were available, and then write programs that not only crawled them or went to each one of the links, basically just looked for all of the hrefs on a page, and then went to that page itself, and then read the content, put the content into a database, and did that over and over again until they made this massive database, and then exposed a text box to say search. And that's how the original search engines started to become what they are today. So this seemingly simple attribute on this anchor tag literally gave us the capabilities to create what we have today, which is the ability to basically search for anything that we want to search for on the internet. Now, I am grossly oversimplifying this, but it is this simple fact that without this, it would have been a lot harder to create these indexes on the web. Now, just a quick antidote still for this hypertext reference. Google, which was not the first search engine. There was a lot of search engines before Google, but Google and the founders of Google had a research paper that they put out at Stanford that basically had this really innovative way to rank sites. They called it PageRank. And what they did was they basically said, hey, if a certain site, say for example, our simple website right here, had a bunch of people linking to us, meaning that on their website, they had an anchor tag, with a hypertext reference back to our site, treat that as a vote. Treat that as a vote of confidence that, hey, we have 100 sites linking to this site. That must mean that the content on this site is valuable to at least 100 other sites. So if you think about that in terms of like a vote, we have 100 other sites voting on this site. Now, if there was another site that maybe had 1,000 votes, but with similar content, and now a user comes and searches for the content that's on both of our sites, the Google algorithm, which was the PageRank algorithm at the time, would then put the site that had the 1,000 links higher than the site that had the 100 links. So that was really the innovative piece behind Google initially that really enabled them to become really the best search engine out there. I'm sure the other search engines at the time had similar techniques, but I know that PR algorithm was a very innovative piece to Google's success. So that was all possible by the use of this simple href attribute, which is kind of crazy, right? To think that things started this way. So to do that, it's super simple. We call this an attribute, and an attribute lives within the opening element. So as you can see here, right, this is an opening element. You know that it's the opening element because it does not have that little / in it, right? And it's coming first in terms of what it's wrapped with, right? In this case, what's inside of it is some content that says this is a link. There are no other elements inside of this, right? There could be. We could say, hey, inside this anchor, and I'll go ahead and just expand this out. And inside this anchor, there is a H6, and then inside the H6 is a link. Now notice how the styling changed here because the browser does have some default styling for these specific types of elements. So the anchor tag by default has that blue color, and if it's visited, it will have that purple color. As you can see here, it's purple because we already clicked it, right? But if we put another link in here, say for example, I grab this and I put this down here and said this is another link, and I won't make it Google, maybe I'll make it ftc.edu, and you'll see here, why is that coming up purple? It shouldn't be coming up purple. I guess because I did go to it. Let's make it something that, my personal site maybe. There we go. You can see here that is actually blue because we have not gone to it yet. Once we go to it, boom, and I go back, and now it's purple. So there are default styles. We haven't gotten into CSS just yet, but there are default styles that are embedded in the browser itself that gives us this default look and feel, right? It's much nicer looking at the text like this. If the text looked like this, I think the World Wide Web would have a harder time finding users to find value in the content because they have to parse through this. That's not good. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and just take this out, and we'll keep this one link on here. Right. And instead of making this an H6, I'm going to make this an H2 just so it gets a little bigger. Right. As you recall from our last lesson, the headings, right? Heading 1, heading 2, there's heading 3s, heading 4s, heading 5s, and heading 6s. These are all really part of almost like a topography hierarchy, right? In terms of the importance, I'll call it the importance of the actual text, right? So an H1 tag, you only want to put on the page once, right? H2 tag, I believe we only put it on maybe once or twice. You want to try to limit it. But this is because of accessibility, right? And I talked a little bit about that in our last lesson where screen readers will look for H1 tags, and you really shouldn't have H1 tags all over your page. You really only want to have one H1 tag. So with that being said, that is basically what an attribute is. And we just looked at a specific attribute, which is the hypertext reference, or the href. This is going to become really, really important when we start to talk about CSS and how do we actually define the look and feel of our website. Right now, this website is not winning any awards, right? This is not going to be a design kind of, you're not going to amaze anybody with the design here, but it is extremely accessible. Anybody can access it over pretty much any connection, right? Slow connections, fast connections. And it's also what we call responsive. It will work on a cell phone very nicely. So it's checking all the buttons in terms of accessibility to the content, but not from a visual perspective. It's not really too visual. We'll get to that. So the next element I want to look at is the image element. Now the image element, I'll keep that right like this. Now the image element allows us to bring in images to the page, right? So an image can be something that we have on our local file system on the actual web server that's serving up the web page, or it could be brought in from an external resource. Typically when we're developing, we typically bring it in from a local resource. For larger websites, they use things like content delivery networks that optimize the delivery of certain images based on location and based on popularity and a lot of other factors. For now, we don't have to worry about that. I just want to really give you an introduction to how do we bring in an image. So to keep it simple, we will link to an external image. Sometimes we call this hot linking. And I'll explain in a second why this is not a good idea, but it gives you a good idea in terms of how to bring in an image. So the image element is simply img, right? And now the image element, you can actually close right away because you don't really need to put content inside of it. You could. Typically we would do that. But in order to actually bring in an image, we need to declare where that image lives, right? Because there's an image file that we need to link into this. Now, this may be a little foreign to you if you're coming from larger authoring applications like Photoshop. It may not be foreign to you if you used more print-related, like Quark and things like that. I know Quark does a lot of linking in of different content. So the content itself doesn't actually live on this page. The content lives someplace else, and we're simply just linking to it. Just like we did with this hypertext reference, the href, we're linking to the page Google, right? Google isn't being brought into our web page, we're just simply linking to it. So to link to an image and then essentially render it on our page, we would use an attribute called source. And it's going to follow the same exact syntax that we followed with the hypertext reference, but we're going to say equal, and then instead of just a URL, we want to actually bring in the true URL of the image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I think this is a really good resource, Unsplash, for royalty-free images. So let's go ahead and grab a picture of maybe the beach. Even though it is the fall now, we're kind of just like, all right, I want to still feel like I can go to the beach. Let's go ahead and grab a nice image here. And I'm just going to grab this bad boy. That looks nice. Now, I'm going to go here, and I could just download this image, and typically you would do that. You would download the image and then save it to the file system. And maybe we'll do that in a minute. But for now, I'm going to right-click this image, and I'm going to say copy image address. Now, on the clipboard, I have the image directly, the link directly to the image. So if I go ahead and paste that into the browser, you'll see this is just the image itself, nothing else. So if I take that link and I put that within the source attribute of the image, like that, right? It's going to be a big link. You'll notice, look at that. It rendered the image right on our page. Now it's a little big, which is okay for now. And there's various different ways we can go ahead and adjust that. But that'll work just fine. Now, this tag is not actually closed, right? Which really isn't valid HTML. But you notice that the browser did the right thing and rendered it. Now, remember, we can always inspect the HTML on the page. If I right-click here and go to inspect, again, I'm using Google Chrome here, you'll see that the image is here. And it's looking good. And you can see, if you scroll over here, you can see it. And you see our HTML here. Now, this is could be a bit confusing, but is this HTML and this HTML the same? It looks the same, right? But it actually is completely different in terms of what is happening here. So this is what we call the DOM, or the Document Object Model. And this is the result of the browser parsing this text into its memory and then rendering it. Now, we see it the same exact way, but in memory, it's actually completely different. Not extremely important right now, but just something I wanted to mention. It's kind of interesting, I think. It's called the DOM. And there's that DOM, that Document Object Model, gives us the capabilities to manipulate all of the elements using JavaScript, and which is, you know, the programming language we studied last semester. So, okay, cool. So now we have this image. I'm going to go ahead, and I'm just going to go ahead and close this image tag like this, which is a little shorthand to close it, because we don't actually have anything inside of it, so we can close it right in its opening tag, which is kind of helpful sometimes. Now we have the image. Now I'm going to get out of this, and I'm going to use a couple of other attributes just to modify the size of this a little bit. And this is going to show you how we can use multiple attributes in a given element. So I'm going to say the image width equals 100px. Now you'll notice how the image just went down to 100px. I'm going to get a little bit bigger. I'm going to go to 250. And there we go. Our web page is looking pretty tropical right now. Now, I used the width attribute of the image element to be able to modify the size. As we're going to see in lessons to come, this is probably not the best way to do this. We're going to do this in CSS, which gives us a little bit more flexibility. But we'll see that in a little bit, right? And again, the other piece too is this source is linking directly to an image on the internet that we do not control. So, and that's really the downside of using these hot linked images, is that if you have a website, right, you are hitting this other website whenever somebody comes to your site. So you're relying on that site to serve up this image for you. That's not good for various reasons. If you had a popular site that's getting a lot of traffic, you're going to send a lot of traffic to somebody else's site, which that's not really the right thing to do, right? You're going to increase their hosting costs and their resources that they need to be able to keep their site running. Not to mention, if they move this image, if they delete it or something happens, your website is going to be negatively impacted by it. The image will go dead, right? So like if we had a bad image here, say for example, I purposely break this by just maybe doing that. I'm actually curious if it'll even break it. Let's see if I do this. There we go. You'll see a dead image here. You don't want to see this dead image. That's not good. That's not giving the people what they need, right? What they're looking for. So let's go ahead and let's do this a little bit differently. I'm going to go here, take that out. I'm going to save this image. And I'm just going to save it to my machine here and then upload it to the editor. So I'm going to say tropics. And then I'm going to go here, open up the file here, go into our images, and it's going to go say show in folder. And let's go ahead and upload this right to our images. Oh, do I not have permission in this folder to do that? Oh, that's not good. Oh, well. All right, so we can't do that right now, but that's okay. If we did, which I could probably fix real quick, but that's okay. We don't have to go into that. So that's okay. Normally what we would do is this would be the relative path. So if this is in the images, like we have this one image here, which is just a vignette, which is kind of just a transparent image with some dark edges and a dark center, which you're not going to really see here. We could try to bring it in. So if we go here and we say source, now this is going to be the relative path. So images / overlay vignette. Ah, you can see it actually. Okay, good. So that works. So this is the actual image that's local to the web server here. Now we control this, so we don't have to worry about sending traffic someplace else. We're sending traffic directly to our site. We're serving up content from our site, and we're in control if it moves or not. So we can be pretty confident that we're not going to be moving this around. So that's really the anchor tag and the image tag. And more importantly, that is attributes on HTML elements. So we're looking at attributes. They are placed in the opening element of the HTML, and they consist of basically what we call a key, which in this case is the href or the source or the width. And then they have a value, which you say equals. In this case, the href is going to be equal to some URL or some web address. And the width is going to be equal to some pixel value. And then the source for the image is going to be either a link directly to an image on the internet, or probably better yet, a link to a relatively positioned image on the file system itself. All right. So I would say get to this point, get an image in there, play around with maybe some source images, play around with some links, maybe link into different things, play around with some different heading tags, and post a link to your environment once you've done this. And we're going to keep moving here. So in the next lesson, I think we're going to be ready to start introducing some basic CSS so that we could start to see how we can style things a bit. And as we start to use CSS a little bit, which really require the use of attributes, we're going to start to get into things like layout and stuff like that. So this is going to start to progress a little bit quicker, but this is really the foundation now. This is really important stuff to be able to understand in order for us to effectively develop web applications and websites. All right, guys? Awesome. Any questions? You know where to find me. Thanks.